Darkness shrouded the silent castle under a moonlit sky obscured by clouds, casting an atmosphere of mourning and dread over the place. The surroundings were draped in black curtains and banners, while people dressed in mourning clothes stood shedding tears and wailing in deep sorrow. While grief was evident on the faces of the mourners, faint whispers emanated from behind the hanging black curtains. Some attendees were whispering about the heirs of the Lovren family, pointing out that the recent incident was caused by the illegitimate son born to the late Duke from a humble opera singer. Those rumors were dismissed as worthless nonsense by Nina, the 15-year-old girl and a member of the Pitch Black Knights. Nina suddenly stood up while addressing the young man sitting in front of her, asserting that everything being said was pure slander, and he noticed that her way of speaking had begun to resemble someone named Jean. Adrian Lacan Lovren, the 16-year-old knight commander, smiled and acknowledged the truth of being an illegitimate son. However, Nina insisted that they had no right to speak that way, emphasizing that neither of them was to blame for the death of that woman's son. Then she wondered to herself if Adrian didn't feel annoyed, expressing her desire to hit them. Nina recalled within herself the nature of her relationship with this young master. He was her childhood friend and the heir to the Lovren family, who was always characterized by kindness and gentleness. She remembered that Duke Lovren had 3 sons. Those sons were Adrian, the illegitimate son, and Gerald and Aiden, the Duchess's legitimate sons. It was natural for Gerald and Aiden to have a greater right to inherit the dukedom. However, since the Duke died before the succession was decided, Adrian also obtained inheritance rights. The problem escalated with the sudden death of the eldest son, Gerald, a short while ago. Therefore, it seemed clear to Nina what the Duchess would try to do now, as her gaze appeared spiteful while she cradled her son's lifeless body. But what drove Nina crazy was Adrian's extreme calmness, as he was the person targeted by all these conspiracies. Although she acknowledged that this calmness was one of his strengths, she wondered how he would survive in this harsh world with such a personality. For this reason, when the other knights returned to the borders of the Violet Forest the previous day, she decided to stay at the Silver Lake Castle with Adrian, refusing her colleagues' attempts to dissuade her from her decision. Adrian seemed a bit annoyed by her childish behavior back then, but she didn't care. Returning to the present, Nina thought she had an important task to accomplish here, while she gripped the hilt of her sword tightly. At that moment, there was a knock on the room door, and Adrian permitted the caller to enter. A servant entered the room and greeted Lord Adrian, which caught Nina's attention. Nina wondered about his sudden appearance, as he hadn't appeared at all since they arrived at the palace. The servant told her that he carried a message from the Duchess, which confirmed the suspicions of Nina, whose eyes narrowed in anticipation. The servant continued, explaining that the Duchess had prepared tea for Lord Adrian, and that she requested him to join her immediately to drink it, while a cold, cunning look appeared on the Duchess's distant features. In a spacious hall, the Duchess received Adrian, expressing her happiness at his presence before the tea she had specially prepared for him to share cooled down. Then she invited him to step forward and sit quickly, while Nina stood behind him, alert. Adrian tried to reassure Nina, insisting to her that everything was fine. The Duchess began her speech, saying that she had been thinking about them for the past few days, then added, remembering that her late son Gerald was a clever and beautiful child. Adrian calmly replied that her son was indeed so, and that she must be heartbroken with grief over him. The Duchess expressed her gratitude for his understanding, then added with a hidden smile that she had a request she would like to ask of him. But before the Duchess could finish her sentence, Nina moved with lightning speed and grabbed the poisoned teacup from in front of Adrian, who looked at her in shock while calling her name. Nina was absolutely certain, and the look of determination in her eyes was reflected on the surface of the tea. There was no doubt it contained a deadly poison. Without hesitation, Nina drained the contents of the cup in one gulp. Astonishment overcame the Duchess and Adrian, who shouted Nina's name while she stumbled with a faint smile of victory on her lips. Her intuition was correct. The tea was indeed poisoned, and streaks of blood began to flow from her mouth as she held the empty cup. The cup fell from her hand and shattered on the floor while she collapsed beside it as Adrian rushed to her. While she expressed her intense pain that exceeded all her expectations, Nina began to feel her throat burning and her stomach melting from the severity of the pain, wondering to herself how Adrian had survived this poison before, indicating that this was not the first assassination attempt. While she lay on the floor, the idea of needing to help her young master occurred to her, but her body had been completely numbed and was unable to move. With the last of her strength, she murmured words of apology to her master. Adrian leaned over her, consumed by grief, asking her in a trembling voice why she had done it. The Duchess looked at the scene with complete coldness, then asked Adrian to leave that insolent guard alone and come to have another cup of tea. While Adrian was trying to reach Nina, 2 men grabbed him and prevented him from moving, while one of them ordered him to return to the lady who was waiting for him. The 2 men forced Adrian to sit on a chair, while Nina lay on the floor unconscious. At that moment, a mysterious purple energy began to emanate from Adrian, and the man holding him felt chains of that energy wrapping around his hand, wondering in terror about the nature of this power. Adrian's eyes glowed red, and he unleashed his power, summoning darkness to dispel his enemies. The guard let out a cry of pain as he struggled against that massive power that manifested in the form of a giant skeleton looming behind him. Skeletons surrounded by a purple aura appeared from thin air and attacked the Duchess's men, who were struck with terror and began begging for their lives, asserting that they had never seen anything like this before. One of the men shouted, warning his lady of the need to flee as their attacks were useless against these monsters. But the Duchess remained sitting in her place, trembling slightly as she watched the scene. The Duchess called out to Adrian in an angry tone, wondering if he thought he would survive this act, while he cradled Nina's body in his arms, surrounded by creatures of darkness. The Duchess denounced him for doing all this for just one girl, so Adrian answered her in a decisive tone as he gathered his strength, saying that he would rather die than leave her. In another scene from that rainy night, where Adrian was pleading with Nina not to do that to him, she looked at him in confusion, barely understanding what he was saying. Adrian was carrying Nina in his arms while continuing his pleas. Nina returned to her painful reality, wondering in her coma if Adrian had survived, wishing she could see the expression on his face, but she could no longer open her eyes. A contradictory feeling of heat and cold swept through her body, as if a battle between ice and fire was raging inside her. She realized that her guardian spirits, North Wind and Frost, were struggling to slow the spread of the poison in her body, but everything began to slow down and cool, and she felt as if she were falling into the depths of a glacial river. Drowsiness overcame her as if she were in a deep dream, and memories of the past began to flow into her mind, making her wonder if her life was passing before her eyes now. Those old days when it all began came back to haunt her in her final moments. The events go back to the day when memories of another world came to Nina. She had been living an ordinary, albeit poor, life. Despite the fact that they worked in agriculture all day in a primitive village that barely provided enough to sustain them, she grew up in happiness and love as the youngest daughter of affectionate parents. She was deeply saddened when her parents died in a carriage accident, but her tragedy did not end there. On her 5th birthday, memories of another world suddenly flowed into her, as if she had entered the world of a novel. Her condition alarmed her family, who wondered if she was sick or if something was wrong. That other world was a peaceful place where no one suffered from hunger or the loss of loved ones. A gentle and beautiful life that made tears well up in her eyes. But soon the memories of the two worlds intertwined in her mind, leading to her complete collapse. She began to scream whenever anyone tried to approach her, rejecting the touch of her sister, who asked anxiously about the reason for her strange behavior again. She screamed in her face not to touch her, asserting that she was not Nina. She declared that this was not her home and they were not her family. Then she rushed out, demanding to be returned to her original world. Her behavior baffled the elders in the village, who wondered how long she had been in this state, believing she had completely lost her mind because of her constant talk about another world. But one of them found an excuse for her. How could a small child who witnessed the killing of her parents before her eyes maintain her sanity? She sat alone under a large tree, whispering to herself that everyone was wrong and did not know the truth, and that she was not Nina, but was supposed to be someone else. Before her solitude was interrupted by her brother's voice calling her. Her brother expressed his gratitude for finding her, stating his happiness that he found her before sunset. At that moment, Nina noticed in shock that his feet were bleeding. When she pointed to his bloody feet, he simply replied that he had lost his shoes by mistake. Then he turned his attention to her, asking her if she was hungry and urging her to hurry back for dinner. He told her that their sister Barry had bought a lot of the candy she liked and would arrive soon. Indeed, he spotted their sister Barry returning from afar and pointed to her. Barry rushed toward them and asked Nina anxiously if she was okay, expressing her overwhelming happiness at her safety. She embraced her tenderly, describing her as their precious little one and the most beautiful in the world. She assured her that her presence was the family's source of happiness. Those warm words, "Let's go home, our Nina," were like the light that dispelled the chaos in her head, and she triumphed in her internal struggle. It might seem strange to say that she fought memories and won, but it was a real victory. Once she overcame the pain, the memories of the other world became part of her, and before she realized it, she had fully united with them. After a while, her brother called her from the door, asking her what he had heard about her helping the fruit shop owner with some calculations that had been difficult for him. Her sister Barry expressed admiration for her intelligence while styling her hair, while Nina shyly replied that it was nothing significant. Barry enthusiastically declared that Nina was very smart and they should send her to a school in the city. But Nina knew in her heart that all this was thanks to the memories that came to her from the other world. After her sister finished tying her hair with red ribbons, her brother praised her beauty, saying that red ribbons suited her very much, and her sister jokingly wondered if other colors would suit her too, offering to dye a blue ribbon for her next time. But Nina happily replied that she loved the color red and felt a surge of joy at that moment. She was happy until the black appeared and took everything from her. Screams echoed in the village announcing the appearance of the black monster, and someone shouted warning everyone to flee immediately. Nina stood frozen in her place amidst the blazing fires, while a woman scolded her for standing still, and she heard cries for help from every direction. Amidst the chaos, she heard the voices of adults wondering where the children were, while another said he needed to fetch something, so she looked around with terrified eyes. She caught a glimpse of her brothers and sisters' charred hands amidst the flaming wreckage and screamed in pain. After the black passed, bandits raided the village, and she, now an orphan, was sold to human traffickers. While held captive, she felt cold and drowsiness overcoming her. In her despair, she heard a calm voice calling her name and reassuring her that everything would be okay. Then a white, luminous entity appeared to her, asking her not to be afraid and that she could move forward once again. The voice told her that the words coming from her heart would be heard sincerely by everyone, and they would easily discover how beloved and radiant she is. Because in her soul, the voice said before she woke up, suddenly wondering if she had dreamed of her brother and sister, or if that was just an illusion. Although the memory was blurry, she felt a sense of lightness washing over her. She murmured sadly that she missed them, but she decided not to surrender to crying, because that would sadden her brother and sister, and she resolved to live her life for them as well. A few weeks later, she arrived at the Lovren family home. A maid greeted her in the kitchen, welcoming her as a new assistant, and asked her to follow her to get to know the place. The maid complained that she had requested someone older and smarter, but they sent a small child. Then she began introducing her to the house, explaining that the family members were the Duke and Duchess, and warned her that the new Duchess was sensitive because she had just given birth to the young master, Gerald. She told her that she would likely not see the Duchess because her work would be limited to the kitchen, then asked her if she was fast at washing dishes and peeling potatoes, advising her to use her break times to learn the details of the palace. Then the maid suddenly caught herself and mentioned that the Duke had an illegitimate son named Adrian, and Nina was surprised at hearing the name. She wondered in shock if this was Adrian Lovren, the male second lead character in the novel she had read in her other world. She remembered the events of the novel, where a villain tries to destroy the world by summoning a corrupted spirit lord, so the Saintess heroine unites with the Archmage hero and the second hero knight to defeat the villain and save the world. A terrifying thought occurred to her. Could all the tragedies that befell her be linked to that romance novel? The maid interrupted her daydreaming, asking if she was listening, and Nina quickly replied that she was, of course. The maid advised her to stay cautious and not get into trouble with the Duchess, adding that the Duchess specifically hates Adrian because he is an illegitimate son, and asked her not to get involved with him if she could help it. Then she asked her to wait while she brought her some potatoes to peel, busy with the kitchen noise, and Nina answered in the affirmative. Nina concluded that if Gerald had just been born, then Adrian's age must be around 9 years, which meant that the current events were taking place much earlier than what was mentioned in the novel. But she soon saw this as an opportunity. Since she knew what would happen in the future, she could help that child. Just as her brother and sister saved her life, she also wanted to become someone capable of protecting others. She resolved that she would save Adrian using her memories, and that she would certainly survive herself as well. Elsewhere, a mysterious black bird was landing on a small boy's hand, telling him that a new child had come to the castle. Little Adrian looked at the bird coldly, saying he was not interested in the matter. He added with an expressionless look that all humans are the same anyway. A few weeks later, Nina was immersed in kitchen work, where she was washing dishes. One of the cooks ordered her to go out and bring more eggs, and she responded immediately. Another cook asked her sharply about her progress in peeling potatoes, and she promised she would finish them right away. The head maid warned her of the need to check the food to be served to the Duchess 2 or 3 times because they couldn't afford her temper tantrums, urging her to focus and hurry. Nina responded to the successive orders as she hurried through the crowded kitchen. After the hard work ended, she sat exhausted in a corner of the kitchen. One of the cooks praised her for her good work and told her she could rest for an hour or 2 before the meal was sent. Nina felt relieved. Although she was worried at first, she realized she could adapt to the situation faster than she expected. Although everyone in the kitchen seemed tense because of the difficulty of the work, sometimes shouting, "Move faster! Who said you could be lazy in the kitchen?" They were actually good people, as they invited her to rest and have tea with them. Nina looked out the window, reassuring her brother and sister in her imagination that she was fine and that their cute little one was working hard here too. But suddenly, silence fell over the kitchen. The Duchess had entered the kitchen, causing the cook to gasp. Madam." The cook asked the Duchess why she had come so close to mealtime. The Duchess replied coldly that she had heard Adrian had not been coming for his meals recently, then issued a definitive order not to send any food to him from now on. The cook was shocked and asked disapprovingly how he would eat then. The Duchess looked at her with a glacial stare and asked threateningly if she was the one looking after Adrian, sarcastically offering to transfer her to the annex to serve him completely. Nina watched the situation in shock, thinking to herself that Adrian was still a child and starving him was extremely cruel. The cook immediately backed down and apologized, saying she had misspoken, to which the Duchess coldly replied, "Indeed." Then the Duchess gave the cook a sharp look and poured the contents of a hot pot in front of her, warning her to mind her behavior. The burning red liquid splashed on the floor, creating a mess. The Duchess left the kitchen, leaving the servants in a state of shock and terror. After her departure, the servants began to sigh and wonder if they really had to stop giving Adrian any food, expressing their regret for what was happening. The maid felt dizzy, so Nina approached her and asked if the Duchess hated the young Master Adrian that much. The older maid confirmed her suspicions, saying that the situation would only get worse from now on. She explained that the Duchess recently gave birth to a son, but the Duke shows no interest in him at all. She added that there is a rumor that the Duchess asked the Duke last night to strip Adrian of his succession rights, but he ignored her. But the strange thing, as another maid commented, is that the Duke doesn't seem to love Adrian either, as almost no one has seen them talking to each other. This prompted the first maid to wonder why the Duke brought his illegitimate son here in the first place if he was going to treat him this way. Despite everything said, Nina insisted that starving a child is very cruel, so she wondered if she could bring him food secretly. The maid scolded her immediately, reminding her of her warning on the first day that the Duchess would punish her severely if she caught her, adding that the Duke already hates Adrian, so what would happen if the Duchess discovered her act? But the head cook intervened, saying, "Enough," and acknowledged that they couldn't leave a child to starve, ordering Nina to leave food for him quietly and return, warning her strongly against getting caught. Nina answered enthusiastically that she understood. Nina headed to the castle annex where Adrian resides. She wondered as she walked in the desolate corridor if she was in the right place, for the place seemed abandoned and scary because it wasn't being maintained. Nevertheless, she felt excited wondering what Adrian looked like, remembering that the novel described him in a certain way. The novel described him as a gentleman so perfect that his bad reputation as an illegitimate son seemed meaningless. He had an elegant smile, a polite way of speaking, impeccable aristocratic behavior, and a voice full of poise. However, the heroine Fiona felt a cold anger behind that perfect smile and meticulous attention, and for this reason, she could never love Duke Lovren. Nina concluded that his harsh childhood was what made him a terrifyingly kind man, and thought that the Duchess she met was truly cruel. She finally arrived at a room she believed was his. She knocked on the door, and a voice came from inside permitting her to enter. She opened the door carefully while asking permission. She entered with a wide smile and greeted the young master, announcing that she had brought him lunch. But little Adrian, who was sitting at his desk reading a book, didn't even lift his eyes. Nina was shocked and wondered if he had just ignored her. She cleared her throat to get his attention, then enthusiastically told him that today's lunch menu was beef soup that smelled delicious, assuring him that he would be surprised when he tasted it. But Adrian remained silent and absorbed in his book. Nina felt some embarrassment at the situation, so she decided to leave the meal on his table. As she was leaving, she looked at him again and asked him to eat before the food got cold. After she closed the door behind her, Adrian lifted his eyes from the book and looked toward the door, wondering to himself, "Young master?" In the kitchen, Nina was working hard, so much so that one of the maids commented that she was full of energy because she was young. But Nina was feeling exhausted, thinking that she thought her knowledge of the future would make everything go smoothly. But this wasn't true. She realized that because Adrian in the original story was just a supporting character who suffered a lot, there was no need to explain his childhood in detail. Nina began to recall what she remembered from the novel about Adrian's life. He was abused in his childhood and his body was covered in bruises. Because of the Duchess's schemes, he was appointed commander of the Dark Knights who fight the Black Monsters. Although the Duchess's attempt to poison him didn't kill him, his health deteriorated severely. Later, the Dark Knights were eliminated because of the villain's plan. After that, Adrian killed all his family members and became the Duke, then neglected his lands, which became increasingly ruined, and dedicated his life only to hunting black monsters. Nina sighed, thinking that his life was truly tragic, but she remembered that after the heroine appeared, the situation of the territory improved slightly. Thanks to the heroine's discovery of special products within the dukedom, the Lovren family became very wealthy, and Nina thought then that Adrian's life would finally become happy after all that hardship. But because of the poison given to him by his stepmother, Adrian died miserably as soon as the final battle ended. Nina felt angry thinking about his fate, wondering why they had to exploit him to this extent, even for being a supporting character. While she could accept the idea of depriving him of love, she couldn't understand the reason for killing him in the end. Now that she had come to this castle, Nina decided she would not let Adrian face this fate. Of course, she had no intention of being dragged into that depressing story. Maintaining the original plot meant nothing to her. The life she is living now is the real story for her. Her first step was to become his friend, but she wondered how she could get close to him. At that moment, one of the maids interrupted her thoughts. The maid jokingly warned her that she thought she had kneaded enough dough, so Nina looked to find a massive pile of dough in front of her and screamed in surprise. Nina apologized, saying she shouldn't have made all this quantity, so the maids reassured her that it was okay as they would eat it. But the head cook suggested with a smile that maybe they could share it with a hungry child. Nina's face lit up at hearing this suggestion, as this was her chance to make the young master smile even a little. She resolved to win his heart through food. The next day, she went to Adrian, who was sitting in his room bandaging his wounds, and she placed a basket full of fresh bread in front of his room door. Adrian looked at the basket, then his gaze shifted to the note Nina had left, in which she mentioned that she would leave it there to avoid interrupting his reading, inviting him to call her anytime he wanted something warm to drink. Meanwhile, Nina was thinking happily that no one hates fresh bread, and hoped to get a step closer to him this way. Since then, whenever ingredients were left over in the kitchen, Nina would try to cook something for Adrian. After a month passed, she went to him carrying a new meal. She enthusiastically told him that today she had prepared pasta with asparagus cream, and for dessert, there were strawberries. Then she suggested they go for a walk because the flowers in the garden were blooming beautifully. But he remained silent as usual, so she left encouraging herself that she is not the type to be easily targeted. After 3 months in the summer, she brought him baguette sandwiches and caprese salad, but she found him still the same, so she wondered in frustration if her plan was still unsuccessful. But she soon gathered her resolve and decided she would keep trying until she succeeded. She continued to bring him food daily, whether it was lunch or snacks, trying to break the wall of silence surrounding him. Nina continued her attempts, offering to bring him tea while he read, explaining that it was tea that helps with sleep. After 6 months in the autumn, she was still bringing him food regularly, but she noticed that he no longer even opened the door, even though she knocked for a long time. She felt frustrated because after 6 months, instead of getting closer to him, she felt they had become further apart than they were at the beginning. While she was standing at his door, the door suddenly opened and Adrian came out, so Nina was surprised to see him. She tried to seize the opportunity and presented today's meal enthusiastically, saying it was pumpkin risotto and that it smelled delicious because it was fresh from the oven and it was best to eat it now. But Adrian suddenly slammed the door in her face, leaving her in confusion. She sat on the floor sadly, considering this another failed attempt and that she was helpless in the matter. But before leaving, she called out loudly that she would leave the food here and wished him to enjoy it. From behind the door, Adrian was listening to her with sad features. Later, Nina was sitting in the kitchen with her colleagues after finishing dinner preparations, and everyone was enjoying the tea she had prepared. The head cook asked her why she was sighing as if the world was ending. So Nina replied sadly that there was someone she wanted to get close to, but he didn't seem interested at all, and that's what saddened her. The cook found that strange, saying Nina is kind and attractive. So Nina explained that she approaches that person sincerely, but she feels he hates her, and it's the first time she's dealt with such a situation and doesn't know what to do. The older maid told her wisely that the time a person needs to open their heart differs from person to person, and if the walls around his heart are too high, he may not hear the voice calling him from below. Nina asked her what she should do then, so she advised her to wait patiently, asserting that if she is sincere, he will realize her feelings one day. Then the maid added cheerfully that it might also be good to offer an expensive bribe, and she presented Nina with a bag of butter cookies, which was a rare thing because butter was not abundantly available to them. Nina realized then why everyone was excited about this gift. It was truly precious. Nina thought that the young master probably hadn't eaten something like this for a long time and decided to take it to him quickly. On her way, she realized that the head servants were right and that she had been in too much of a hurry. She didn't start this expecting something in return and decided that if she continued helping him quietly, they would become friends one day. When she arrived at the annex, she noticed that all the lights were off. She remembered, thanks to her ability to gather information, that today was the day of his private swordsmanship lesson. She concluded that the lesson hadn't finished yet and that the training ground was nearby. She decided to watch quietly from afar. But she stopped suddenly when she heard an angry voice. She saw the swordsmanship instructor slap Adrian, shouting in his face, ordering him to repeat what he said, calling him an arrogant rascal. The instructor, who looked drunk, asked Adrian if he had a problem with his training methods, and if he thought he was easy because he was a little drunk. Then he hit Adrian again, saying he lacked any charm, and that's why his parents abandoned him. Adrian felt bored with this situation and wondered to himself if he should simply get rid of this instructor. He could have eliminated him with a wave of his hand, but he backed away from the idea, realizing that nothing would change. For if he got rid of him, another bad teacher would come to replace him, and he would spend another exhausting day in the same way. His life had always been in the same pitch darkness, but he reconsidered, for recently a strange flaw had appeared in his dark life. A strange girl who keeps appearing before him and talking to him kindly, regardless of how much he rejects her. Even though he knew that what she showed was just temporary sympathy, he deliberately treated her with greater coldness. But he admitted to himself that whenever he saw her smiling face, he felt something strange in his heart. While the instructor continued to insult him, Adrian found himself suddenly thinking of that girl, without knowing why. Then he thought despairingly that by now she must be tired of someone like him. At that moment, Nina interrupted him, screaming, "What on earth are you doing?" and struck the instructor on his head. The instructor screamed in surprise and pain, wondering what rascal did this. Nina jumped on his back, complained about the foul smell of alcohol emanating from him, and scolded him for hitting a small child. The instructor screamed in anger, asking her why she doesn't get out of his face and if she wishes for death. While Adrian was looking at the scene in shock, and the instructor wondered about the identity of this crazy girl. The instructor grabbed Nina, who screamed, identifying herself, and warned him not to dare touch her young master. Then she turned to Adrian and asked him to leave the matter to her and run away immediately, assuring him that she would help him. But the instructor grabbed her wrist tightly, mocking whether she thought he was an easy opponent, then threw her away. Adrian rushed to Nina to ask her anxiously if she was okay. The instructor stood up, cursing angrily, while Adrian was still beside Nina, asking her if she had been hurt. The instructor stood up and grabbed his sword, declaring in a decisive tone that these rascals don't know their place, and that he would teach them a proper lesson. At that moment, an aura of darkness surrounded Adrian as he embraced Nina to protect her, then summoned the darkness, asking it to respond to his call and devour his enemies. Chains of dark energy appeared and wrapped around the instructor, who screamed in terror, asking what this power was and calling for help. Amidst his pain, the instructor confessed while screaming that he was only carrying out the Duchess's orders, before letting out a final, horrific scream. His screams faded into the darkness, leaving nothing in the training ground but a pool of blood and the instructor's sword. While Adrian was kneeling beside Nina, she realized in shock that the power he used was the power of shadow and darkness spirits. She knew from the novel that Adrian was contracted with spirits, but she never expected to see it herself, and wondered how he had contracted with spirits at such an early age. Contracting with spirits requires absolute faith in their existence and power, which means that all spirit users have gone through a moment of despair that forced them to believe in what is invisible. She wondered to herself about the horrors he must have gone through to reach this stage. Adrian snapped out of his state and grabbed Nina with great concern, asking her again if she was okay and if she was hurt anywhere. But Nina, who was overwhelmed with shock and fear from what she saw, felt in her heart that she was not okay at all. Nina bowed in confusion and wondered what she should do, for she felt something strange and didn't know how to act. Then she showed him the broken cookie bag and apologized to him, saying that the cookies she made for him had shattered, but she ignored the matter of the cookies and asked him anxiously if he had been hurt. Her concern surprised him. Then he found himself embracing her tightly, saying there was no need to worry about him. They sat together on a garden bench, and Nina wondered if the disappearance of the sword instructor would cause a stir. Adrian reassured her, saying he is always drunk, so they would simply think he fell asleep somewhere. She offered him a piece of the broken cookie, saying that eating sweet butter cookies would make him feel better. Nina ate a piece, saying it was very delicious and every crumb of it should be eaten, while Adrian watched her in silence. Then Adrian spoke suddenly, saying that because of her, she almost got seriously hurt earlier, and he asked her not to interfere in his affairs from now on. So Nina asked him while eating the cookie why she shouldn't interfere. She added that Adrian didn't run away and saved her instead, which surprised him. Nina told him cheerfully that he felt the same way she felt, and that he couldn't stand by and watch what was happening either. Adrian grabbed the piece of cookie in her hand, appearing as if he wanted to say something, but Nina suddenly interrupted him, pointing to the sky enthusiastically, asking him if he saw the shooting star. Adrian looked at the sky and wondered what shooting star she was talking about, then answered that he didn't see it. Nina expressed her regret that he missed it, and told him that next time he sees a shooting star, he must make a wish 3 times. She closed her eyes and began to wish out loud that there would be cake at the New Year's Eve party. Adrian looked at her and smiled slightly. Nina asked him why he was laughing, asserting that cake is a really important matter, so he answered that he understood that. Nina noticed that neither of them had eaten dinner properly and offered to bring him something delicious from the kitchen tomorrow. Adrian thanked her and suggested they return now before anyone saw them. Nina told him she would enter first, and before leaving, she stopped to wish him a good night. Nina remembered the maid's words that if she was sincere, he would recognize her feelings one day. She also remembered her scream while defending him, and she said to herself that friends don't call each other young master, and that she would not leave him alone. Then she decided she must call him Adrian from now on. Nina reached out her hand to him happily and suggested they go for a walk tomorrow. Her hand trembled slightly as she thought he might see her as arrogant for a kitchen assistant, but she insisted. Adrian surprised her when he smiled and grabbed her hand. He agreed to her suggestion, saying it seemed like a good idea. He looked at her, saying goodbye, and telling her that he would see her the next day, and she responded with overwhelming happiness. The next day, they went for a walk to a quiet corner of the garden where no one comes. Their outing was modest, consisting of nothing more than stale bread and a broken teapot, yet the sun's rays were warm and the wildflowers filled the air with their fragrance. A yellow butterfly landed on Adrian's finger, and he gazed at it with a serene smile while Nina watched him in silence. And so, from now on, they became friends. 4 years passed, and on a snowy winter day, Nina was calling out to Adrian from behind his frozen bedroom window. She told him excitedly, while holding a piece of cake, that there would be cake at the New Year's party this year as well. Adrian, who had grown into a fine young man playing the violin, smiled and replied that it was wonderful news. Nina tasted the cake happily, declaring that butter and sugar truly were the best, expressing her amazement that there was cake again this year, and that wishing upon shooting stars every year had been worth the effort. Adrian agreed with her. Then Nina mentioned that she remembered hearing a lot of talk lately about the Dark Knights. She noted that the Dark Knights might be disbanded and a new squad formed, because the mortality rate from fighting the black monsters reached 50%, making them difficult to manage compared to the money spent on them. Nina grumbled that if the problem was financial, the Duchess could simply reduce her extravagance, and then Adrian wouldn't have to use the worn-out items she collected for him. But Adrian calmly replied that he was fine with the current situation. Then he looked at her with gratitude and thanked her for always being by his side. Nina answered cheerfully that there was no need for thanks since they were friends, and as she spoke, she stepped closer to take another piece of cake. However, Adrian wiped the cream from her face with his finger and licked it, saying with a smile that he enjoyed the cream too. Nina's face flushed red with embarrassment at his action. Nina announced she would head back early as she had much work to do to prepare for the New Year's party. Adrian asked if she was really leaving, expressing his wish for her to rest more. Adrian wished that the blessings of the Great Spirit would overflow upon her. Nina replied happily as she departed, wishing him a year blessed by the Great Spirit as well. After stepping out into the cold, she felt a shiver and thought that next time she should at least bring an old blanket with her. As she was walking down the corridor, she suddenly collided with someone. Nina immediately bowed and apologized profusely for bumping into them. The Duchess glared at her with a look full of loathing, asking disdainfully how a rat could be in her house, expressing her extreme disgust and the filthiness of the scene. 2 maids surrounded her, and the Duchess mockingly asked if she would become clean if her hair was shaved and water was poured over her, then ordered her to be taken away. Nina was thrown into the freezing cold, shivering intensely while one of the maids felt a pang of pity for her condition. The maids mocked her, saying, "This is what happens when one wanders around the annex." Nina could not bear the bitter cold and collapsed onto the snowy ground, losing consciousness. Some kitchen servants found her and wondered in horror what had happened to her, rushing to bring all the blankets from their rooms and massaging her arms and legs to warm her up. Adrian stood at the door of her empty room, while the servants wondered how many hours she had been left like that, as she had nearly frozen to death. Adrian looked at her red hair ribbons lying on the floor, then cautiously opened her door, calling her name in a low voice. After Nina hovered between life and death for 4 days, she finally woke up. The silver lining of this incident was that the Duchess no longer paid her any attention, likely assuming she had died. Nina admitted to herself that she was right in her assumption. If not for the help of the spirits of the north wind and frost, she certainly would have died. But the problem wasn't her survival. Rather, it was that Adrian began avoiding her again, and this situation had persisted for an entire week. She wondered angrily if he thought she would give up, and decided she must make it impossible for him to avoid her. Nina hid under her covers, and when Adrian entered the room, she surprised him by saying she knew he was there. Adrian coldly told her he didn't want to talk to her anymore and wanted her to leave. When Nina didn't move, Adrian called her name again, but she remained silent. Suddenly, Nina moved quickly and pulled him toward the bed. Hovering over him, she commented that he was trying to ignore her again. She added that she knew he was doing this because he didn't want to lose her. But Nina replied that if things continued this way, he would lose her regardless, and in the worst way possible. Adrian told her she would get hurt if she stayed by his side, as it had happened before and happened again this time. Nina asked him, And what of it? Emphasizing that she only wanted to be by his side. She suggested they pretend not to know each other during the day, but they could meet like this at night, and asked him if that much was acceptable. Adrian agreed to her suggestion, and Nina hugged him with overwhelming happiness. From Gunal on, they only met at night when surveillance was lax. Adrian seemed anxious at times, but he would smile gently as usual whenever their eyes met. That smile simply made her happy, without her knowing what was truly on his mind. 2 years later, on Adrian's 15th birthday, the Duke appointed him commander of the Dark Knights. Nina was shocked by the news, asserting that this was impossible, and that sending him there meant sending him to his death. Although she expected this to happen according to the novel, she hadn't expected it to happen so soon. At that moment, Adrian called her by name. Adrian opened a small box containing all his savings. He told her the amount wasn't much, but it should be enough to pay the Lovren family for her freedom. Then, with a sad smile, he asked her to leave the Duke's house. Nina realized that Adrian was already preparing to say goodbye to her. Adrian told her that his only worry was her. Nina sat at his desk, thinking about his words. She held the box and realized that Adrian still didn't know her very well. With a determined look, she wondered if he really wanted her to run away alone, asserting that such a thing would never happen. After Adrian left, Nina also prepared to leave the Duke's castle. After gathering money from selling the pin Adrian had gifted her, along with her savings and the amount the senior kitchen staff had collected for her, she managed to cover her travel expenses. Everyone bid her a warm farewell, wishing her good health. Fortunately, joining the Dark Knights was not difficult. When submitting her application, she showed the mark on her hand to the official, who was surprised and told her she had been accepted. Nina endured 6 months of grueling soldier training and finally received her assignment to join the Night Squad on their journey toward their destination. Upon arrival, she wondered if this was the Violet Forest. One of the knights was surprised that the place was named the Violet Forest when the colors of the trees looked normal, so Nina explained to him that they were still on the outskirts of the forest. She told him that the violet color deepens as they get closer to the barrier, and that this color is caused by the leakage of the corrupted Spirit Lord's poison. Someone mocked the idea of a Spirit Lord's existence, wondering if anyone still believed in that legend, while another asked them to leave her alone because she was still a child. But Nina knew it was real, just as described in the novel. She remembered the legend that long ago, when the gods entrusted the world to the great spirits and crossed the sea of glass, one of the Spirit Lords rebelled against the great spirits. The rebellion was suppressed by the other Spirit Lords, and the corrupted Spirit Lord was shattered and fell to Earth. Thus, the corrupted creatures, the Black, appeared on Earth. For this reason, the Dark Knights guard this place to prevent those monsters from descending to the villages and harming people. When the carriage arrived, everyone was told to get out. There was a large group of new recruits, and some veteran knights wondered how many of them would survive. Nina felt excited, as this was the first time she had been apart from Adrian for a long time, and she wondered how happy he would be to see her. She saw Adrian from a distance and noticed some knights whispering about how young he was to be a commander. Nina sighed as she saw her new colleagues mocking her and her young age, but she pushed them aside and ran toward Adrian, shouting, "Young master!" She jumped in the air, waving her hand and announcing her arrival, drawing everyone's attention. Although Adrian's expression seemed stiff, she was certain it was an expression of happiness. But he asked her coldly, "Why are you here?" And she answered cheerfully that she had applied as a recruit. Adrian sighed and asked her again why she had done such a thing. Adrian told her this wasn't a place one comes to on a whim, and that she didn't even know how to hold a sword. Nina tried to interrupt him, but he continued, warning her that fighting the Black meant she might die. She interrupted him, saying there was something she had been hiding from him all this time. She revealed to him that she was a spirit user just like him. Adrian asked in astonishment if this was since yesterday, so she told him it had been since before she met him, and that her sister and brother were killed by the Black. She explained that she didn't want to recall those painful and sad memories, so she had kept them hidden until now. But now she was trying to accept everything, because there was someone she wanted to protect. Nina told him with a smile that life is always a series of hardships and sorrows, and that finding joy and happiness within it was entirely up to her. Therefore, she had come here in search of her happiness and told Adrian there was no need to feel guilty. She added playfully that she would just have to work harder to learn swordsmanship, and that they had told her she was talented during training. Adrian asked if she was going to stay by his side, and she assured him that she would. Adrian warned her with a serious look that she might regret it, but she replied firmly that she would never regret it. Adrian laughed, admitting that he couldn't win against her. Then he hugged her warmly, welcoming her and expressing how much he had missed her. After that, Adrian and Nina worked hard to make the Dark Knight's headquarters a livable place. Adrian reformed the system and training methods, while she took on the task of cleaning. She grumbled about the filthy bedding and terrible meals, saying that if she were in their place, she would want to die the next day. Therefore, she did her best so that people living without hope could look forward to tomorrow, and she would run around carrying food, shouting and asking who was going to miss their meal, and people who seemed as if they would never change began asking about tomorrow's menu and greeting each other warmly. 2 years later, more people chose to stay voluntarily in the night squad. One evening, a knight named Jin asked Nina about the nature of her relationship with the commander, as he had been curious for a while. He wondered if their relationship was romantic. Nina looked at Adrian in silence for a moment. Then she put her arm around Adrian's shoulder and announced cheerfully that it was just friendship, while Jin commented sarcastically that this was a lie. Jin complained that if their relationship was just friendship, then it meant he had no friends. So Nina replied by asking why they were blaming her for his lack of popularity. Jin felt angry at her provocative response. Another knight laughed, saying there was never a quiet day. Nina felt that she had gained a new family, not just colleagues. But shortly before, a letter arrived from the Lovren house. One of the knights told them that the letter said the young master Gerald had passed away. Nina immediately realized that this was the moment, and that the incident in which Adrian would be poisoned was about to occur. She resolved that she must stop it. Therefore, she attended the funeral with Adrian. As expected, the Duchess summoned Adrian. Nina had imagined a heroic scene where she would push away the poisoned food and shout, "This is poison." But what happened was that she ended up drinking the poison without realizing it. However, she concluded that she wouldn't have been able to escape the situation without drinking it anyway. Nina's consciousness returned to the moment she drank the poison, as she didn't remember well what happened afterward. All she felt was extreme cold and sleepiness. In her coma, she felt someone calling her continuously. Adrian's voice echoed in her ears, calling her name and asking if she was alive, begging her not to leave him. Adrian realized that her breath was very weak and that she would die if she continued like this. As the rain poured down, Adrian made a desperate decision, thinking that if he dived directly into the darkness, he didn't have time to think, even though he had never tried it before. He summoned the darkness, asking it to lead him to a safe place where there was no path and no light. Adrian teleported through the darkness, suddenly appearing before one of his knights. Jin was surprised to see his commander in such a wretched state and asked him if he had run all that way and what was happening. Adrian asked him eagerly about the location of Dr. Kirill, then told him that Nina was in danger. The knights gathered around Nina lying on the bed, and Kirill, the doctor of the Dark Knights, asked what on earth had happened. Adrian told him that Nina had drunk the poison in his place. He added anxiously that she had coughed up a lot of blood, and he didn't think she was breathing, and that her body temperature was very low even though he had run as fast as possible, fearing it might be too late. Jin and Louis, the vice commander, tried to calm him, assuring him that Nina was strong and would be fine. After examining her, Kirill commented that her condition was interesting, as she had lowered her body temperature to slow the spread of the poison. Kirill assured them that at this level, he believed she would survive, then asked someone to bring some herbs from his greenhouse. In the world of the unconscious, Nina felt calm and thought that resting peacefully like this might be, but suddenly intense pain swept through her body. She began to writhe and scream in pain, so Kirill ordered Adrian to hold her arms and legs firmly. Kirill explained that as her bodily functions returned to normal, she would feel pain as if her whole body were being stabbed with knives, and that she had to overcome this. Her painful screams continued to fill the room. Adrian held her hand tightly while calling her name, in a desperate attempt to help her endure the pain. Nina woke up on a sunny morning, stretching and yawning. She said she had slept well, but she suddenly screamed from the pain she felt in her body. Kirill entered the room and commented sarcastically on her causing chaos as soon as she woke up, while she was complaining that her body hurt as if she had been severely beaten. When Nina saw him, she asked where they were, and he told her they were in a village near the Violet Forest, and that he had come down here to focus on her treatment. Nina wondered if this meant Adrian had brought her all this way from the Duke's castle, and Kirill confirmed that, adding it was a week ago. Kirill commented that he never thought in his life he would see such an expression on the commander's face. Then he scolded Nina for making people worry about her, and she replied that she had a good reason for it, and that she was against hurting patients. Kirill told her that the poison had damaged her mouth, throat, and stomach, and that her other organs wouldn't function correctly either. He promised her he would do his best, but told her she would need at least 6 months of rehabilitation before she could return. Nina muttered that 6 months was a very long time, but she soon announced with a wide smile and a peace sign that 2 months were enough. And after 2 months, Nina indeed returned to the Dark Knight's headquarters. Her colleagues greeted her with surprise, wondering how she returned after only 2 months and if she was really okay, and she assured them she was fine. She told them that Kirill himself agreed to her return, although he was grumbling that he didn't know if he was treating a human or a bear. Jin excitedly suggested throwing a party to celebrate her return, but Nina mocked him, saying he just wanted to use her as an excuse to drink. Nina smiled mischievously as his plan was exposed, while Adrian watched them from a distance. but he ignored them while he was talking to one of his knights about something. At night, Nina was lying in her bed feeling sick, wondering if drinking alcohol was still too early for her. She remembered that Adrian didn't come in the end, saying he had things to do and wondered if he was okay. Suddenly, she heard a sound outside her room and wondered who was there. Adrian entered the room, and Nina was surprised by his presence and asked him if something was wrong. Adrian asked her directly why she had committed such an act, despite her prior knowledge of the poison's presence. Nina asked him if he was angry. Adrian looked at her and wondered to himself if he was angry. Then he asked her coldly, "Why should I be angry?" He continued sarcastically that a loyal subordinate drank poison in his place and that he should praise her for that. He added that he should celebrate having such a loyal subordinate. Nina realized he was truly angry and asked him to calm down. Adrian approached her and begged her not to talk that way. He said sadly not to speak, as if she were overreacting to nothing, as if all this meant nothing to her. He retracted his words, but he knew he shouldn't speak like that. He admitted that this time, too, he could do nothing but watch her suffer. He remembered how he carried her while running through the forest in the rain, and how he was afraid he would have to let her go like that. He said he was so afraid she would leave him. The truth was that he knew if Nina stayed by his side, she would continue to get hurt. He admitted that he shouldn't have accepted her into the night squad when she came, and that everything was his fault. He felt that he had exploited her compassion. He hugged Nina quietly, and Nina called him by his name. Nina told him she knew the tea was poisoned, as he said, for the metallic smell was too strong to ignore. Adrian asked her angrily why, but she interrupted him, saying the reason was obvious. She said she did it because he was going to drink it, adding that he had known everything from the beginning too. For that reason, he had deliberately stopped her from checking the tea first. Nina warned him in a firm tone to be prepared from now on. If he drank poison, she would drink it instead of him. And if he planned to take a knife stab, she would take it instead of him. Adrian looked at her in silence, then said that if he had made that choice, it would have been… Nina interrupted him, saying she knew that was part of his calculations. He thought drinking the poison was the only way out of the situation, as he possessed some resistance to poison, and even if he collapsed, it would ease the Duchess's surveillance of him. She told him she understood his plan, and that she didn't do it to save a pitiful young master. Nina laughed and said that although she loved him, she wasn't a fool. She knew her young master was no innocent, gentle lamb. Adrian felt embarrassed, thinking that she knew everything and yet chose to stay by his side. Nina asked him to sit down, saying she had something she wanted to say too. She asked him not to hurt his body regardless of what he planned, wondering what if he died early, and told him she would be very sad if he died after only doing good for others. Adrian asked her quietly, "What about her?" And he wondered to himself what would happen to him if she weren't with him. Nina smiled and promised him she would be careful too, asserting that this was the best promise a dark knight could make in this forest full of black monsters. She reached out her hand and said he must definitely keep this promise. In their world, people pressed their palms together when making a promise. As they placed their hands together and looked into each other's eyes, she assured him that he must keep the promise completely, and he agreed. The next day, Nina felt dizzy during training. Jin noticed she didn't look well and suggested she skip today's patrol, but she answered that she just hadn't slept well. After Adrian left the previous day, Nina had rested, thinking that incident number 3 had passed safely. But she remembered that the next incident was the total annihilation of the Dark Knights. She tossed and turned in her bed anxiously, thinking that they had finally organized the squad's affairs, and now they would face total annihilation. She felt this was too much even for a secondary character, and wondered what on earth would happen. In her anxiety, she fell asleep and saw strange dreams. She dreamed that a giant black monster destroyed the fortress, and another dream that a black monster devoured her. The next morning, she asked Jin what he thought would be the reason if the Dark Knights were wiped out. Jin was surprised by her ominous talk and asked if she had seen a nightmare, so she replied that it was something like that and she felt anxious. Jin said he hated even to imagine it, but he believed the reason might be a lack of money. So Nina wondered why a money problem appeared so suddenly. Jin explained that their weapons barely contained 10% Lingxi steel because it was expensive, and with these weapons they couldn't even penetrate the skin of a high-level black monster. And if swarms of high-level black monsters attacked them in this state, they would certainly be wiped out. Nina felt more anxious, saying this was too realistic, so Jin scolded her for panicking after she had asked him to tell her. Jin tried to calm her, saying that high-level black attacks were rare, so they would be fine, and that they couldn't do anything about money problems anyway. He added jokingly that they had no hope unless they found a steel mine or something like that, so Nina was surprised by the idea of a mine. Nina suddenly remembered that the heroine Fiona had already discovered a mine in the Violet Forest. Not just any mine, but a Myeongchol mine, which was even better than Lingxi steel. But the novel only mentioned that the kidnapped heroine discovered it by chance, so she had no idea where it was. She thought about searching the forest alone, but if she encountered a high-level black monster, she would certainly die. She wondered if there was any other place where money could come from, for even if she delayed searching for the Myeongcheol mine, their situation would improve significantly if they could at least get Lingxi steel weapons. She resolved that she must do everything she could, for she could not let the Dark Knights be annihilated and would not lose any more family members. While wandering in the forest, Nina suddenly tripped, so Jin caught her, warning her to be careful. Nina noticed oil leaking from a fallen tree and wondered what it was. Jin was surprised at oil coming out of a tree, but Nina immediately knew it was an oil tree and told him that if its oil was used for lamps, it would be more fragrant and brighter than cheap candles. Jin was surprised by her great knowledge of the matter, so she replied in confusion that she somehow knew it, while thinking the reason was that she had read it in the novel. She remembered that the heroine Fiona made lamps from oil trees and transparent berries she discovered by chance, making a vast fortune from it. Nina shouted excitedly and said she had found the solution. Nina announced she would make money from this discovery. Nina went to Kirill and asked him about the herbs that grow in the violet forest. She told him she planned to grow a quantity of them and sell them in the market, and asked him if that was possible. Kirill replied that the idea wasn't bad, as supply is always lower than demand for herbs, especially those that only grow in the violet forest. Kirill began to check his herbs, noting that this herb and that one were in good demand. Nina pointed to the oil tree and said its oil was fragrant, and if they sold it as lamps, it would be very popular. So Kirill wondered if this was true. Kirill commented that she knew a lot for a doctor, so Nina replied that she was very interested in business. Kirill told her that trying to save money was a good idea anyway, as the rumors about the duchy were very bad recently, and supplies might be cut off soon. Nina asked him what kind of rumors, so he told her they had a lot of debt and that creditors were coming and going. He added that the Duke's Guard Knights continued to lose in exchange matches, and there was even talk of them not participating in the Imperial tournament at all. Nina wondered what an exchange match was, so he explained to her that it was a competition between the knight squads representing each family. The competition was over the rights to use the crystal well located between the lands of the Lovren family and Count Lava. Nina realized they had lost last year as well, meaning they had lost for 2 consecutive years, which would make farming and livestock breeding difficult. Nina thought that Kirill must have informants throughout the territory. Then she asked him. Nina thought that Kirill's skills as a doctor were wonderful, and he could have gone anywhere, but she wondered why he stayed in a small knight squad like this. Nina asked him directly why he was in the Dark Knights, and he answered that the reason was obvious. He told her with a terrifying smile that here he could dissect humans as he pleased. Nina felt terrified by his answer. She sighed, saying there wasn't a single sane person in this squad, so Kirill asked her if she knew she was included in that description, and she answered, of course. The daily routine in the squad was always the same: training, breakfast, patrolling the violet forest, in addition to collecting useful plants. While they were collecting plants, Nina found what she was looking for, as she dug up all the plants the original heroine discovered in the violet forest and planted them in her own private garden. She showed Jin some transparent berries and told him that they would soon become the star product of their business, but he didn't understand what it was. Nina remembered that Fiona had made the Lovren territory prosperous this way too, so she thought it was good to plant them in advance in her garden, which she obtained after pestering Louis. Of course, she didn't know when the young master would become a duke, but she wondered to herself if Adrian would really end up killing his family with his own hands, and she felt angry thinking about what the Duchess had done. But if he was labeled a traitor for killing his half-brother and father, she didn't want that. She would rather kill them herself than have him labeled a traitor. Then she wondered if this meant he wouldn't become a duke because the third young master was still alive, and she thought about the possibility of a rebellion or a coup, but she ruled it out for lack of justification. Her thoughts were interrupted by Adrian's voice, asking if she was trying to do all this in one day. He told her he heard she was running around as if she were going to loot all the herbs in the violet forest, so he wondered what was happening and came to see. Nina told him the weather was starting to warm up, so if she planted the herbs diligently now, they would grow abundantly in the summer and they could harvest them in the autumn. Adrian offered to help and asked where they should start. Nina told him she had already dug the holes, and all they had to do was move the herbs and seedlings. She asked him to hold them carefully so as not to damage the roots. After finishing the work, Adrian commented that it was harder than he thought, so Nina asked if he felt satisfied now that they were finished, and he agreed with her. Nina told him that when he becomes a duke one day, she will revive the territory with this. Adrian asked Nina seriously if she wanted him to become a duke. She whispered to him that this was a secret, but she told him that all she wanted was for Adrian to smile. Adrian smiled and said she only wanted difficult things. Nina wondered what was difficult about that while he was right here, and Adrian replied that she was right. He was here. Nina told him cheerfully that even if he didn't become a duke, she had a plan. She said she would sell tons of products through a trading company and they would become wealthy, and then they could eat lots of cake every day. so Adrian simply agreed with her. Nina added excitedly that she would also change the bedding to softer ones and replace all the old weapons, and Adrian agreed. Adrian told Nina that he would soon form an elite force to deal with high-level black monsters. He explained that he would collect those with good skills separately and classify them, because without competition, people's level deteriorates. But Nina wondered if it wasn't hard not to deteriorate when every day was a survival crisis. Adrian replied that it couldn't end with just surviving, but they must look forward, and that setting goals was his job as a commander. Then he suggested she apply to join the elite force too, adding that members would get long coats and she would look great in them. Nina said excitedly that she will plant the garden and that he will develop the Dark Knights. She reached out her small hand and said she was counting on him from now on, so he touched her hand, saying he was counting on her too. After that day, the test for choosing elite knights began. The names of those who passed the test were announced at the founding ceremony, but the final number of chosen elite knights didn't even reach 10, and the names Jin and Nina were on that list. While distributing the long coats designated for the elite knights, Nina was impressed by their beauty, but when she tried the coat on, it was too large for her, which provoked laughter from Jin and mockery from Lewis. Lewis tried to comfort her, saying she was still growing and would soon fill it, so Nina grumbled and told him to wait and see. As the seasons passed, they both grew, wounded and broken, relying on each other for support. 2 years later, the plants Nina had planted bore much fruit. Nina, who was now 17 years old and an elite knight, carried a basket full of fruits, feeling satisfied that this amount would be enough. She looked at the flourishing garden and thought that this was the result of 2 years of effort. She felt proud of herself and kept imagining Adrian praising her for her hard work. She said to herself that she must hurry and show the young master what she had achieved. Over time, the supplies coming to them worsened, but thanks to the garden, they became largely self-sufficient. Nina thought the project to enrich the Dark Knights was going perfectly, or so she thought, until she saw that scene. She saw a giant crystal pyramid floating in the air, surrounded by mysterious chains and runes, and realized they were in trouble. She wondered if there were any other traces, but she didn't see anything. She thought that no one comes to this cursed forest anyway, except for the crazy cultists. She screamed in terror, realizing they were in real trouble. She remembered that the Dark Knights were being annihilated because of the villain's plan, and that Adrian would suffer irreversible emotional trauma. She was 100% sure this was the incident. She wondered in despair what she should do, and felt she must stop this no matter the cost. She thought of the Dark Knights as her family and decided she couldn't lose her family again. But she scolded herself, wondering how they sneaked in and why she was so negligent. Nina regained her composure and decided that the incident hadn't truly started yet, so she had to return and inform them first. She tried to think positively. Since they discovered it early, they should be able to stop it. But her positivity soon faded as she realized the situation was actually fortunate, and things weren't that bad. Suddenly, she felt dizzy and everything around her changed. She found herself suspended in the air by plant branches and realized she had fallen into a trap. It was a trap set by a plant-type black monster, and she wondered if the venom spread every time the leaves of that giant flower shook. She decided to hold her breath for as long as possible, but she didn't know how long she would last. She grabbed her sword, knowing she had to end this quickly. She summoned the spirit of the north wind, asking it to blow everything away with its lightning speed. Then she summoned the spirit of frost, calling for its sharp breath that freezes and cuts everything to appear. With the help of the spirits, she managed to cut the branches holding her. She delivered a finishing blow to the heart of the giant flower. However, she fell awkwardly and injured her ankle, feeling intense pain. She looked sadly at the herbs she had gathered, now ruined, and mourned their loss. But she soon composed herself, realizing she had no time for this and had to hurry. She tried to stand and walk, but she was stumbling due to her injury. Yet she decided she must hurry and tell them. She summoned the north wind again and asked it to carry her on the wings of the wind. She appeared before Jean, who was surprised to see her. Jean asked her in shock what happened to her, and Nina laughed weakly. Jean scolded her for going to the forest alone, reminding her that the rule is to work in pairs and that even beginners follow this rule. Nina apologized and said she would listen to his lecture later. She asked him to tell everyone that someone at the barrier had drawn a magic circle. Before she could finish her sentence about notifying the temple, blood began to bleed from her nose. She fell unconscious as Jean screamed her name. The knights gathered around her bed, and Kirill reassured them that she would recover quickly from this level of poison. But he added that the ankle injury was a problem, and she wouldn't be able to participate in combat for several weeks. Adrian sighed in relief after hearing the news, while Jean wondered how deep into the forest she had gone alone, deciding he would scold her severely once she recovered. Adrian asked Jean if he had checked the magic circle Nina mentioned. Jean replied yes, and that when he went to scout, he found a magic circle he had never seen before. He explained that it seemed dangerous to touch recklessly, so he left it as it was. and Adrian praised him. Adrian thought about the presence of a magic circle at the barrier and concluded that only one person would do such a thing now. Adrian thought about the Duchess, who had been quiet since her son's funeral, and wondered if she had started moving again. While standing with his knights around Nina's bed, he thought about how they still didn't know the enemy's goal. He added that the barrier problem was beyond what they could handle alone, so they agreed they must inform the temple. Meanwhile, Nina was in a dreamlike state, wondering where she was, as the place felt familiar. She heard a voice reassuring her that everything was fine and that she would surely meet them again. The voice told her that if she did that, Nina woke up wondering about the dream. She stretched, saying she had slept well, but she suddenly screamed in pain, and Kirill hit her on the head, to which she protested, asking why he would hit a patient and saying she was against violence. Kirill told her sarcastically that only her mouth was still alive and told her to eat her lunch. He scolded her, saying that everyone's hearts couldn't handle what she was doing anymore, and wondered how many times this had happened now. Kirill told her to stay put because her ankle was injured and that the fortress would be quiet today because there was no patrol, and Nina wondered why. Kirill explained that she had discovered a problem at the barrier, and when they informed the temple, they sent a priest. Now, the commander and the elites were following the priest to inspect the barrier. Nina felt relieved that the temple moved so quickly. She thought it was good because she didn't know much about barriers and was at a loss about what to do. She believed this problem would pass easily just like this. She stopped him anxiously, inquiring if all the elites had already gone out, and Kirill replied that he didn't realize how things would end or what might eventually happen. Nina felt extreme fear and got out of bed. Kirill shouted, calling her name, but she was already up and limping away. She wondered to herself in denial how she could have forgotten that fact, that the final boss in this story is... She ran, trying to ignore her pain. Suddenly, a massive explosion occurred in the direction of the barrier, and Nina screamed Adrian's name. She remembered that the final boss in this story was the High Priest. Nina and Kirill looked out the window toward the explosion, and Kirill wondered what was happening and if it could be where the barrier was. Nina asked Kirill to hurry and run to the main fortress and help evacuate people first. Kirill asked her in shock if she was planning to go to the forest, warning her that she might die in her condition. Nina looked at him and pleaded for him to survive. Kirill realized her determination and decided to trust her. Nina used the power of the wind to dash quickly toward the forest. Meanwhile, the barrier had already shattered, and black monsters began pouring out in large numbers. Jean was fighting fiercely, cursing the situation and wondering why the flow of black monsters continued endlessly. He realized that his and Lewis's strength alone wasn't enough, especially after everyone else had fallen. He wished there were just one more person to help them. At that moment, Nina appeared, summoning her spirit powers, the fierce wind blade and the biting frost, delivering a powerful blow to one of the monsters. Jean was surprised to see her, and Nina apologized for being late. She immediately asked him where the young lord was, and Jean pointed to a nearby spot. Nina ran, shouting his name. She found him sitting on the ground next to Lewis, who was trying to wake him up, confirming he was still breathing. Lewis shouted, warning Nina to watch her back. A monster attacked her, but she managed to deflect it with difficulty. Nina felt that chaos had already taken over the place. While fighting, she screamed at the monsters not to block her path. She used the power of ice to finally kill the massive monster. However, she felt her condition wasn't as good as she expected. She saw that only one side of the barrier had shattered, but she realized that if the other side broke too, more black monsters would pour in. If that happened, no one would survive. She noticed the barrier shaking and wondered if that meant... Then Nina ordered everyone to gather. Nina summoned her old allies, North Wind and Frost. She called for the silence that swallows everything, the perfect winter shield, to appear. A massive ice barrier formed, but Jean wondered anxiously if all this poison would kill them as soon as they breathed it in. Nina rushed toward Adrian and asked him anxiously if he was okay. Adrian was barely conscious, supported by Lewis, but he looked at Nina and asked her how she was and if her leg was okay. Nina replied that she wanted to ask him the same question. Adrian tried to say he was fine, but was staggering, so Nina asked anxiously if he was truly okay. Lewis told her that Adrian was closest to the explosion and that his survival was a miracle. Nina wondered which explosion he was talking about. Adrian explained with difficulty that there was a religious extremist hiding in the temple. The priest who was inspecting the barrier told them there was a problem and asked Adrian to come closer to help. Adrian listened to the priest's chants without any suspicion, unaware that it was a spell to cause an explosion. With the explosion, a potent poison spread, and the knights collapsed instantly. Adrian felt guilty. saying it was all his fault for making such a stupid judgment. He apologized to Nina repeatedly, but she smiled and told him it wasn't his fault. She held his hand and reassured him that she would handle this. She ordered Jean and Louis to take the young lord and evacuate the place. Jean refused firmly, saying it was absurd to leave without her, but she told them they had no time for a long conversation. She explained that the ice shield wouldn't hold for long. Unfortunately, with only her spirit powers, Frost and North Wind, she couldn't reseal the barrier. But she told Adrian she had a really good idea and asked him to trust her. He concluded she was going to summon a higher-level spirit. She explained that the barrier wasn't fully broken yet, so if they borrowed the power of a high spirit, they could stop the situation, and that this was the smartest decision at the moment. He was impressed by her idea, but Jean wondered if spirit users could actually do that. Adrian explained that to summon a spirit you haven't contracted with, you must pay the appropriate price. He looked at Nina with concern, realizing she was planning to offer her body as a sacrifice. Nina replied with a sad smile that she had no other choice. This was the only way now. She said she didn't want them all to die here together, but Jean and Louis objected, saying it was impossible. Adrian intervened, saying he would do it himself. Since he was also a spirit user, he could use this method. He ordered everyone to evacuate with Nina, but he couldn't keep standing due to his injury and nearly fell, but Nina managed to catch him. She mocked him, saying he could barely stand due to the poison now. She held him and told him he was the young lord, and she was the only one who could do this. Adrian told her that at least he wouldn't leave her alone, and if they died, they would die together. But she insisted he must go, as they needed someone to report what happened. She asked him what would happen to the knights who fled, leaving their commander if he died, and Adrian hesitated. She asked him to fulfill his duty. She added that living is also a responsibility, and that staying alive is also a duty. Adrian refused angrily, thinking to himself that he didn't need any of that. What did others matter, and what would he do with his life? He added that if he lost her, he would lose everything. Adrian pleaded with her not to try and leave him behind, but he thought that saying this would only make it harder for her. At that moment, the ice shield Nina had created shattered. Louis shouted, warning the commander that they must evacuate. Adrian tried to stop Nina, but she had already made her decision. Nina stood alone before the broken barrier. She smiled at them as she raised a victory sign, bidding them farewell. She ordered the North Wind one last time to take everyone to safety. Then she prepared for battle, saying it was time to give her all for the last time. She faced a massive black monster charging toward her. She sighed, saying the monster was impatient and that it would return anyway, so it should take its time coming out. Nina began summoning a high spirit, pleading with the burning flames and the heat that burns and explodes everything, appealing to that raging, endless fire. She also declared the offering of her body, blood, and bones as a sacrifice. She felt a massive and terrifying presence and smiled. She thought that by this time, Adrian should be far away in a safe place. She was confident that no matter what happened, Louis and Jean would protect him in her stead. If so, she was at peace. Nina continued by declaring the offering of her soul to the altar of that eternally raging fire. She ordered the crimson flame to descend. She thought that this kind of ending wasn't bad either. A massive light exploded and she felt satisfied. The light was like the sun, so bright it was impossible to distinguish day from night, and it could be seen clearly even from the edge of the violet forest. Far away, Adrian and his colleagues had been transported by the power of the wind. Adrian fell to his knees, gasping for breath. He thought that a spirit that cannot maintain its power means its master has passed away. Adrian struck the ground with his fist in anger, shouting that he had told her clearly before not to sacrifice herself. He remembered all the times Nina had put herself in danger for him. Louis suggested returning to the fortress for now. He added that they needed to check the commander's injuries, and Kirill was there too. They had to return to the Black Shield Fortress. Adrian refused to return and ordered them to go straight to the village and prepare to activate the Great Barrier, explaining that many black monsters had already been released and they had to move as quickly as possible. Louis reluctantly agreed, but Jean protested, saying he didn't understand what they were saying. Jean insisted that the first thing they should do was go back there to check if Nina was alive. Adrian interrupted him, saying that if Nina were safe, she would return. He added confidently that if she were alive, she would definitely return to him. Jean looked at the bright light emanating from the explosion site and wondered how that could be possible. Adrian looked down sadly, thinking that without Nina, his life was over. So he vowed that those who took Nina from him would lose everything as well. That night, only 3 members of the Dark Knights survived. Adrian returned to the Black Shield Fortress and tried to activate the Great Barrier that protects the entire village, while Jean and Louis dealt with the black monsters that escaped from the Violet Forest and helped Kirill evacuate the villagers to safety. When they returned to the forest after the long night ended, they found a shining sword plunged into the pyramid and glowing gold and silver symbols sealing the broken barrier. The 3 stood sadly before the majestic scene. Meanwhile, a strange rumor spread in the village. On that desperate night when the barrier broke and everything was filled with poison and black monsters, there were people who saw the sun. A light so bright they couldn't look directly at it, and that radiant sun-like being saved them. Nina woke up in a green field full of flowers. She wondered where she was. As the place felt familiar and intimate, she heard a voice calling her. She saw her brother and sister approaching her. She couldn't believe she was seeing them before her as they called her name. Her brother told her he had been looking everywhere for her to give her a gift and placed a wreath of flowers on her head. Her sister said it suited her very well and that their little one was so beautiful. Her brother added that he couldn't tell her apart from the flowers. Nina began to cry. Her brother asked why she was crying and offered to carry her on his back, while her sister offered to hug her. Her sister hugged her, playfully wondering when she had become so big and heavy. Nina told them she was crying because she was so happy, but she knew this was just a dream. Whether it was a dream or a flash of her life before death, she didn't care. She wanted to tell them something. Nina told her brother and sister that she thanked them for loving her so much, and despite only causing trouble, they continued to love her. It was late, but she had always wanted to say this to them. Her brother replied that they already knew without her saying it, and her sister added that she was the most precious youngest member of their family in the world. Her sister said it had been hard for her all this time and invited her to return together now to their home. But Nina replied that she couldn't return now. She couldn't leave her friend Adrian alone. She said she couldn't and wouldn't return to the time when her brother and sister were alive, because she had a new home now. And although she didn't know who made her see this dream, she asked them to appear now. The dream scene vanished as if a page of a book had been turned. Two majestic spirits appeared before her, one of fire and the other of ice. Nina asked who they were, and the fire spirit apologized to her. The fire spirit explained that while inspecting her soul briefly, it seemed her memories had become mixed together. The fire spirit asked if she was very upset. Nina replied that she was happy to see her sister and brother after all this time. The spirit remarked that it could feel her forgiveness directly. But Nina wondered to herself who these two were. They certainly weren't human. She wondered if they were the spirits she summoned and why they felt so familiar. She asked them hesitantly, admitting her question might seem strange. Had they met before? She quickly added she didn't mean to flirt or anything like that, but they really seemed familiar. The ice spirit replied that this was the first time they had met. Nina was surprised and wondered what it meant, and if there had been a previous time. The fire spirit explained she was truly shocked when she heard her recite a spell offering her body and soul. Nina felt confused, wondering if that wasn't the way it was supposed to be done. The spirits told her it was enough to trust them, and that only corrupt spirits or other beings ask for such a price. Nina realized that the simplest yet hardest condition was merely faith. She asked excitedly if this meant she hadn't died and was perfectly fine, and if it would be like cheap plot developments in stories where she couldn't return now after seeing two spirits. The ice spirit replied simply that she wasn't dead and that they wanted to see a human ready to offer their soul, so they broke the rules a little. The ice spirit remarked that she wasn't listening, while Nina was jumping for joy that she hadn't died and was full of energy. Nina turned and asked if she could ask another question. She wondered about their identities, then backtracked to ask which spirits they belonged to. Nina apologized, saying she honestly didn't know, but she pointed to the fire spirit and said she could guess her identity at least, as she was the one she summoned last. Nina realized that the fire spirit was the massive flame that burns forever, the sun, but she pointed to the ice spirit, saying she didn't remember summoning him at all, wondering if he had come to the wrong place. The fire spirit said she would give her a hint. She explained that this being is the one who uses her old allies, North Wind and Frost, as shields, which is why he was able to reach her before her. Nina wondered in amazement if he used North Wind and Frost as shields, and a doubt crossed her mind about his true identity. So she asked him if he was Winter, which the ice spirit confirmed. Nina realized the situation and apologized for not recognizing them, but she suddenly screamed, realizing this wasn't right. For the more concepts a spirit embodies, the higher its level. Therefore, both the sun and winter are supreme-level spirits, and in common legends, they are treated as gods. She wondered in astonishment how she had summoned two beings of this level. The spirits admitted that what she did was extremely reckless. The sun spirit explained that because a human body cannot fully withstand her power, many parts of her body were damaged, and if not for Winter, she would have burned to the bone. Winter confirmed that fortunately, he prevented her soul from being damaged. But they told her they had to rebuild her body, and that it wasn't easy and would take some time. Nina wondered anxiously about the length of some time when spoken by the sun and Winter. She thanked them, saying this was fortunate anyway, thinking that she didn't know how long she would wait. But time would pass quickly if she slacked off as she never had before. The sun spirit interrupted her thoughts and said she would teach her swordsmanship in the meantime. She announced she would teach her personally. She asked playfully if it was a good idea and not boring, adding that of course she had no choice but to refuse. So Nina answered hesitantly in the affirmative. Nina screamed in shock. The sun's teaching was merciless. and when she was rolling until she almost died and collapsed from exhaustion, the sun would restore her to her perfect state, saying she would help her, making Nina wish for death instead. Nina sighed as she continued her training, saying there was no concept of days here, so she didn't even know how much time had passed. She screamed that this was 1,000 times harder than life in the dark nights and made no sense. After a long period of hard training, the Sun Spirit wondered if Nina had reached a level not embarrassing to present now. Nina protested, questioning the delay, enlisting the arts she had learned from swordsmanship, archery, spear-wielding, and magical defense to horse riding. The Sun's response was that her previous skill level was absolutely pathetic. She told her that as the contractor for the Sun in winter, she must be the best, and that this was natural. Nina grumbled that training someone until they become a sword genius is why high spirits, but she stopped when the Sun threatened that if she continued complaining, she wouldn't tell her the good news. Nina asked excitedly if there was good news, inquiring eagerly what it might be, and the Winter Spirit confirmed her suspicion. Winter told her he had made her wait a long time, but announced that her new body was complete. Nina felt immense joy, shouting the word freedom, while Winter commented on how harsh the training must have been for her to act like that, and the Sun regretted that there were still many things she hadn't taught her yet. Winter explained that while rebuilding her body, he increased its durability to make it much stronger than before, and the Sun had helped significantly with that. But he added that since her body was created under their influence, there would be some external changes. Nina wondered anxiously if the changes were so large that others wouldn't recognize her. Winter reassured her that the change would be limited to her eye and hair color only, so Nina accepted it, hoping the colors would be beautiful. The Sun told her there was one more thing. Time flows differently here than in the human world, and when she opens her eyes, almost 2 years will have passed since that day. She asked if she agreed to that, and Nina replied that this was actually shorter than she thought. She said she was worried, as it felt like she had trained for at least 100 years, and wondered if 100 years had actually passed. Winter turned his face in silence, and Nina wondered in shock if she had really trained for 100 years. The spirits told her that in any case she should return soon because everyone would be worried, and they thanked her for her hard work and for enjoying her company. Nina wondered if she would see them again. They replied they didn't know, but they would always be by her side even if they didn't meet. They asked her to close her eyes and take a deep breath. Before she left, the Sun asked if she wasn't curious about something, like the reason for her having these memories, and Nina replied she already knew the answer. She said it was clear. It was so she could meet Adrian. The Sun agreed, saying this was the answer most like Nina. Nina asked with her eyes closed if it was over and if she could open her eyes now. She opened her eyes slowly. When she opened her eyes fully, her appearance had completely changed. Her hair had become platinum silver and her eyes golden. She looked at herself happily, realizing she was truly back, and thanked the Sun and Winter. She noticed her face had really changed. Her hair was the color of Winter's platinum silver, and her eyes the color of the Sun's gold. She thought her previous body was in poor condition and suffering from the effects of poison, but this new body looked incredibly strong. She looked at the barrier that had collapsed 2 years ago and saw the emblems of the Sun and Winter shining on it, realizing the spirits were the ones who sealed it. She grumbled a bit that they had made her suffer for 100 years, but she was grateful because thanks to them, she was able to save everyone and survived herself. She thought about the passing of 2 years, and since the night sky looked exactly like that night, it still didn't feel real. She wondered if Adrian had killed all his family members in the meantime and reviewed the timeline of events in her head, believing she was in the stage after the night's annihilation and before he killed his family. She thought they were a terrible family, and that was exactly why she didn't want Adrian to stain his hands with that blood. She shook the thoughts from her head, saying she didn't know what would happen and what was the use of worrying here. Nina decided she needed to hurry, as everyone must be waiting for her. She summoned the north wind, asking for swift feet that bring winter, and took off with amazing speed. She realized this was the same transportation magic she used before, but it was much faster now. The speed was so incredible that she could already see the fortress. But she noticed the fortress was under attack by flying black monsters that resembled owls. Nina was angry at these insolent creatures attacking while everyone was asleep. She looked for anything that could be used as a weapon. She jumped high into the air using the power of the wind. She was impressed by the height she reached and felt it was no longer just help from the spirits, but as if they were moving as one body. She prepared for battle and decided to start by warming up. She pounced on one of the monsters and defeated it easily. Then she finished off the second one immediately. She wondered sarcastically if that was all, as it was far too easy. She felt all that suffering, estimated at 100 years, was worth it and thanked the Sun Spirit. Then she decided to finish off the rest quickly. She looked at the fortress and saw that people were still fighting. She assumed they were the Dark Knights and reassured them that she was here to help. She dodged a fire attack from another monster easily, saying that dodging attacks of this level had become a piece of cake now. Suddenly, the north wind's balance faltered due to the heat, and Nina began to fall. At that moment, Adrian appeared and summoned the darkness to devour his enemies. Nina was surprised by this spirit magic. Nina fell to the ground in pain. She felt frustrated because she wanted her appearance to be grand and wondered why things always got messed up. She heard a voice calling her name. She raised her head and saw Adrian standing before her under the moonlight. Adrian gazed at her with a deep look, overwhelmed by sadness and consumed by longing for her. She smiled at him, saying she was a little late. Moments before, Adrian had been informed of a swarm of rank A black monsters near the fortress. He ordered everyone to stay on alert because the numbers were larger than reported. He realized at this rate, they would attack the territory and that the three of them had to deal with this somehow. Adrian ordered everyone to focus and not scatter, but he noticed that Jean was standing there dazed, so he asked him what he was doing. Jean pointed with a trembling hand toward the sky, where Nina was fighting the black monsters. Jean thought that if he wasn't imagining things, then that person was... Adrian whispered her name as he saw her in the sky. After she landed on the ground, Nina sat down tiredly and said she was a bit late. She laughed softly and asked him if 2 years wasn't more than just a bit. She thought that her young master had grown up a lot, but Adrian suddenly jumped and hugged her. Adrian hugged her tightly while trembling, whispering her name and repeatedly asking her how she was. He remembered all the moments that had passed since that day, and the hundreds and thousands of times he wanted to ask her. He remembered her words as she asked him to fulfill his duty and wondered how she could decide to leave him alone. He hugged her even tighter, muttering incomprehensible words, trying to blame her for risking herself. Nina gently touched his face and called his name. She admitted that she was wrong. Adrian wondered in confusion why she was apologizing to him and what mistake she had made. He interrupted her firmly, calling her name and assuring her that she had already returned. He hugged her again, saying that this was enough. Jean ran toward them crying, hugged Nina tightly, and called her a stupid fool. Nina laughed and said she was happy to see him in good health and that his strength remained the same. Jean told her while wiping his tears that he truly thought she had died. Then Nina greeted Louis, who was standing beside him. Louis smiled, muttering in amazement that she was truly the Nina he had known. He asked her if her body was okay and if she was injured anywhere, so she assured him that she was perfectly fine and that he had just seen her fighting. Louis commented that he saw that reckless method and that he had a lot to say. So Nina replied that she regretted it a little too. Louis added that the color of her eyes and hair was concerning and wondered what had happened to her during this time. And Nina was happy because she was waiting for someone to ask her. She asked everyone to pay attention and announced that she would tell them all the amazing things she had been through. But before she could start, her stomach interrupted her with a sound, so she cheerfully suggested they eat first. During the meal, she told them everything, from her meeting with the high spirits of sun and winter to the story of enduring harsh training for over 100 years, and even about her hair and eye color changing because of the new body the spirits made for her. Jean commented that it was so ridiculous it was hard to believe and that he got goosebumps. But he added that seeing her eat well, at least she wasn't a ghost, and he had no choice but to believe her. Nina commented while eating hungrily that she was very hungry from the hard work earlier. She realized she hadn't eaten or slept for 100 years. She began to feel very sleepy and wondered why she couldn't resist it. Adrian suggested they go to bed now, as they had to return to the castle tomorrow and everyone must be tired. Nina grumbled, saying she wanted to stay awake longer as there was so much she wanted to talk about and know, but Adrian reminded her they would be together tomorrow anyway. Nina was happy with this idea. She suggested they all sleep together and that they could spread blankets, making Jean feel like he was in a summer training camp, while Louis saw it as a beautiful memory. Indeed, the 4 of them slept next to each other on the floor. While they slept, Jean asked Louis to increase the food budget now that Nina had returned, but Louis flatly refused. Nina smiled as she listened to them, remembering that Jean always talked a lot in his sleep. She felt warm listening to the familiar voices and laughter, as if they had only parted yesterday. But she realized that 2 years had already passed. She looked at Adrian's sleeping face and noticed that the boyish look had disappeared. She noticed how much taller he had grown and how his hand had become so large it was hard to hold with one hand. She realized she hadn't been by his side all this time, but she thought it was okay, for she was back now, and she had endured all that time just to return. She decided that from now on, they would always be together. Meanwhile, Adrian noticed that her hair had grown very long. He thought that while listening to her story, he felt sad and wondered how she endured all that time, and if she regretted it or wanted to give up. He wondered if she had resented him. He wished this moment was a dream and that the past was just a very long nightmare. Adrian woke up the next morning. He got out of bed calling Nina's name. He searched for her everywhere in the room while calling her. He opened the room door, only to find Nina standing outside in front of one of the windows. She cheerfully asked him if he had woken up. She gave him a morning greeting. She noticed he was covered in cold sweat and told him she had gone out first because he seemed to be sleeping deeply. She asked him with concern if he was okay and if she should bring him some warm water. Adrian thought with relief that even after the night had passed, Nina was still here. He replied to her calmly, confirming her words, then gave her a morning greeting, calling her by her name. Later, while they were riding horses back, Nina thought of something. She asked Louis why only he, Jean, and Adrian came to fight the previous night when there were so many black monsters. Wasn't that dangerous? Louis explained that they wanted to minimize damage to the territory, so they tried to deal with it quickly with a small elite force. But he added that His Excellencies, Adrian's joining, was not actually part of the plan, which surprised Nina. She cried out in great astonishment, decrying his use of His Excellency and expressing her disbelief that it could be true. She asked suspiciously if the young master had become a duke, and Adrian calmly confirmed this to her. Nina congratulated him in confusion, but wondered how that had happened. Adrian was not the next heir to the duchy. According to the original story, he didn't slaughter his family and take this position. Jean explained that the incident was severe and occurred the day after the barrier event, and that it was the first time he had seen His Excellency that angry. He added that no one imagined he would draw his sword in the meeting room, and that the old duke's face turned completely pale. Nina felt shocked. Terror washed over her as she thought about him drawing his sword, concluding that a horrific massacre had occurred despite her previous hopes to avoid it, and she wondered in sorrow why it happened in her absence. But Louis hastened to reassure her, explaining that Jean was only joking. But he added that everyone had a hard time stopping His Excellency that day. Nina thought in shock that something had indeed happened. Nina asked Adrian directly if he had really drawn his sword in the meeting room, and when she asked him what happened after that, Adrian told her calmly that he had been kicked out of the Duke's house. Nina wondered what he meant by his words. Adrian explained that immediately after he drew his sword, the guard knights rushed in, and he thought they would either all die or he would die, one or the other. But he decided to return to the Black Shield Fortress and stay quiet. He said he remembered the last thing she said to him. He remembered when she told him that staying alive was also his duty. Therefore, after returning to the Black Shield Fortress, he reorganized the Dark Knights because they couldn't simply disappear like that. Louis explained that they faced death several times, and it was like the Dark Knights before the commander came. They truly struggled. Then one day, a plague spread throughout the empire. Nina was surprised, as this was information she didn't know either. She thought that the original story starts when the heroine Fiona appears, so there are many hidden parts about Adrian's past. And except for the truly major events, she doesn't know much either. Louis told her that both Duke Lovren and the young lord, Aiden, died from that plague, and now Adrian is the only remaining legitimate heir. Jean said what happened next could be guessed. Even before the funeral ended, the Duchess allied with the Duke's younger brother. They claimed that Adrian had poisoned the Duke and the young lord and tried to imprison them when they came to attend the funeral. Nina commented sarcastically that they were accusing him of poisoning when poisoning was their specialty, and Jean agreed. Louis added that this was the beginning of the final succession war for the Lovren family, and so the final succession war for the Lovren family began. Most of the followers sided with the Duke's younger brother, so it seemed hopeless for Adrian. But despite that, Adrian did not lose even once. In just half a year, he ended everything and became a duke. Louis admitted that at that time he was both impressed and terrified. He felt like he was riding on the back of a fierce tiger rushing toward its destruction, but he added that now, perhaps they can finally relax, because the only person who can restrain that fierce tiger has returned. Nina listened to the whole story in amazement and said that a lot had indeed happened during her absence. She wondered if it wasn't as bad as she feared, for Adrian didn't kill his family directly, and it seems the Dark Knights were preserved after all the ups and downs. She felt happy because the future she wanted to change was gradually changing, and now they could use the wealth and lands of the duchy freely. After hardship comes ease. When they finally arrived at the Black Shield Fortress, Nina was shocked to see the dilapidated state of the fortress, where a few servants greeted them at the entrance. She froze in place as she looked at the scene. She wondered to herself just how poor they were. Kirill suddenly appeared, saying he rushed over when he heard the news. He approached Nina and found her crying, so he asked why she looked like that. Nina called out to Kirill with tears filling her eyes. She hugged him while crying and told him that a long time had passed, and asked him what they should do about their financial situation. Kirill asked her to choose between being happy or crying. Nina told Kirill that she heard everything on the way here, that the young master inherited the previous duke's debts and the territory is so poor they can't even farm. Nina hugged Kyril, telling him he was the only one she could trust now, and asked him if her garden still existed, asking him to pick expensive and fast-growing herbs from there. She suggested they plant them in the empty duchy lands and sell them, and Kyril wondered if the knights hadn't told her. The knights whispered that they were afraid she would be too shocked if she found out, so Nina wondered what they were whispering about. Jean told her hesitantly that there is no land. He explained that the previous duke lost a third of the duchy. Nina was shocked and wondered how that could happen. Louis told her he would explain and asked her if she knew about the exchange meeting. Nina confirmed that she knew about the exchange meeting and the crystal well located between Count Lava's lands and Duke Lovren's. She explained it's a competition where they fight with Count Lava's house every year for usage rights. Meanwhile, Louis explained that the Dark Knights were excluded from participating every year on the pretext that they didn't represent the territory. Nina added that all she heard were news of their constant losses, and wondered why the subject of the exchange meeting was suddenly brought up. Louis told her it was an extension of that. They were promised to regain land usage rights if they won, and even a transfer of ownership if they occupied that land for 10 years. Here, Nina shouted in anger, questioning why the previous duke accepted that while continuing to lose. So Louis explained that the duke was indebted to Count Lava's house and accepted the proposal as a way to be forgiven for that debt. Nina felt the impossibility of the situation. Without land, she didn't even know where to start. She thought that titles in this empire are determined by the fief, so the decrease in land might lead to them losing the title of duke. She wondered anxiously what they should do and what she could offer at such times. Adrian interrupted her, explaining that he had omitted the most important explanation. He explained that ownership had not fully transferred yet, and that this was the 8th year, so if they win even once within 2 years, they can regain the land. Louis commented that this might be true, but Jean pointed out regretfully that their lack of numbers made the chance of winning non-existent. Nina stopped them for a moment, then realized she was worried about nothing and suggested they continue drinking. Jean told her the situation wasn't that easy. They need to fight in teams of 10, but most of them retired after the Civil War, and only a few remained. He added that Lava's knights possessed the elite, equipment, and high morale, but Nina interrupted him saying that doesn't matter and confirmed confidently that she would win everything. Louis and Jean commented that they would have said it was impossible if it came from anyone else, but they felt her ability to do so after seeing her fight yesterday. Kyril wondered jokingly if her body made by the spirits was truly strong, expressing a desire to dissect it, so Nina shouted at him in disapproval. Nina said that solving one of the concerns made her feel relaxed enough to lose consciousness. Nina muttered while half asleep that she would solve the problem, make money from rare plants, and then gather talented people. Nina reassured Adrian that with her, everything would succeed. Adrian smiled in agreement, thinking she had no choice but to be the knight commander. Nina laughed in her sleep, confirming there was no one but her, but she suddenly woke up wondering in confusion about the position of knight commander. Adrian asked Louis to bring what he had requested earlier, and Nina wondered what was happening. Louis brought documents that seemed difficult for Nina to read, so Adrian explained that the procedures are complicated even if they were informal. Then he called her Nina Ladelle, granted her the title Ladelle, and announced her appointment as the commander of the Dark Knights. Nina screamed in shock and surprise. She wondered why he chose her, and Adrian told her he couldn't hold the commander position forever. She protested, saying there was the vice commander Louis, but Louis replied that he believed a civil service position suited him better and that he was happy to relinquish the position to her. Then she wondered about Jean because he was older than her. So Jean replied sarcastically how he could deal with such a headache, but added that if she insisted, he could take the vice commander position. Nina wondered hesitantly if it was okay to make such an important decision so suddenly. Adrian told her it wasn't sudden and that he had been thinking for a long time that she was the only one who could take the position. Nina felt shy and wondered how she could refuse while he was smiling like that. She reluctantly agreed, but said she had one question. She asked him if the title he was giving her was Radelle or Ladelle. Everyone wondered if this really mattered now, but she insisted she was curious because if there was a middle name, there must also be a fief. Adrian answered her with a smile that of course her title was Dell, and her middle name was Law, and that her rank was Viscountess. He explained that it was necessary to do this much to keep a spirit knight who returned from the dead and contracted with high spirits. She asked if he meant so that she wouldn't be underestimated anywhere, and she agreed. Nina accepted the matter with all humility. She jumped with excitement, screaming that she was a noble now too, while Kyril grumbled that she would blow out his eardrums. Kyril commented that the Dark Knights are treated as villains these days and that everyone will be shocked when they discover that this annoying person is the new commander. Nina wondered why they were called villains, then answered herself that she believed outsiders saw them as villains who slaughtered the ducal family and seized the title, and Jean agreed. Nina said nothing could be done about that, and since they can't be heroes anyway, they should play the role of villains brilliantly. Jean protested, asking why they couldn't be heroes, and suggested they simply do that. So Carol called them to fill their cups first. They all raised their cups and toasted to the villainous heroes. Carol asked Nina to tell them more about the spirits she met, and she answered enthusiastically that she had so much to say they could stay awake for 3 nights. Later that night, Nina woke up. She got up wondering when she had been moved to a room. She noticed the strange pajamas she was wearing and wondered if she had slept while someone changed her clothes, thinking she must have drunk too much. She felt a headache and wondered what happened. She suddenly remembered that her name had become Nina Ladell. She thought that it was her first title, a name Adrian chose for her. She told herself she liked it very much. She felt she couldn't bear it and that she suddenly missed him dearly. Elsewhere, Adrian was sitting alone in front of a chessboard. He suddenly stood up and headed to the window of his room. Adrian welcomed Nina, who appeared on his balcony using the power of wind. Nina asked him if he wasn't surprised at all, so he answered her with another question, asking who else would come through the window. He asked her if she couldn't sleep, and she answered happily that she woke up and missed him so much she came to visit him. She noticed the chessboard and wondered if he had been playing chess all this time without sleeping, and if she was interrupting him. He told her she wasn't interrupting at all and offered to play with him, but she apologized, saying she didn't understand the rules. She asked him to come to her quickly. She lay on his lap laughing, saying she wanted to act spoiled like this after all this long time. She said this feeling was surprisingly nice and that he should try it next time. Adrian told her that this way he could only see her hair and that he wanted to see her face. Nina sat beside him, saying he had no choice then if he wanted to see her cute face, so Adrian said he was honored. She suddenly asked him who changed her clothes to these pajamas. Adrian told her it was Kirill, so Nina asked if the situation was so bad they didn't even have a maid. Adrian hurried to ask if it was very uncomfortable and offered to do it himself immediately, but she interrupted him, saying that wasn't it. Rather, she was thinking they could fill the position slowly with good people. She said she could handle it because she was Nina Ladell now, and he was busy. Adrian smiled and told her that he actually already had candidates in mind. He explained that they gathered some money through austerity measures. He told her he would give her free reign over both, the money and the candidates, and to do as she pleased. Nina wondered jokingly if Adrian trusted her too much. He held her hand and told her he trusted her, and he assured her he trusted her more than he trusted himself. He got very close to her, so she backed away in confusion, saying he was too close. She said embarrassedly that the room was a bit warm and asked if she should open the window more. She thanked him for his trust in her and promised she would work hard. Adrian told her there was something else he wanted to give her. She wondered what it was. When she opened the box, she found her red hair ribbon, so she asked in shock how he got it. He told her that on that day, he heard she was injured and went looking for her. He found the ribbon lying on the ground where it had been abandoned. He confessed he didn't have the courage to tell her, for he felt very ashamed of himself for failing to protect her, and was sorry she got hurt because of him. Adrian confessed that after her disappearance 2 years ago, he felt a lot of regret. He had always wanted to give her a title and rank one day, and he should have returned her hair ribbon. There were many things he wanted to do for her, and he didn't want to feel any more regret. So he decided that from now on, he would say it over and over again. Then he told her he trusts her, because she is a very special person to him. Nina remembered that the Adrian she remembered from the original story was a person who trusted no one. He was known as the most aristocratic duke in Lovren, polite and elegant, but no one knew when he might stab you in the back with his sword. He had no choice. He was surrounded by enemies from all sides, and there was no one he could trust. But they had reached this level of trust now. Nina asked him if she should give him a gift too, and told him that since he did something good, she would give him a lap pillow as a gift. She asked him cheerfully who bullied him during her absence and that she would scold them all. Adrian laughed softly. He asked her who he should ask her to scold first, and that a whole night wouldn't be enough. He lay on her leg, relaxing. Nina commented on how handsome he was, and that he was beautiful even as a child, but he had become even more handsome. She said the woman who takes him will be truly lucky, and she remembered when he told her he trusted her. Nina told herself she didn't want to be the only person Adrian trusted, expressing her wish for his world to expand and become wider. She promised him she would help him so he could see a much wider and more beautiful world. Later on, Adrian entered, carrying a cup of warm milk, but found she had already fallen asleep. He thought she must be tired as a lot had happened today. He covered her with a blanket while smiling. He remembered that day, the day he thought he had lost Nina completely. He regretted, and regretted again, and swore. He swore that they too, just like him, would experience the despair of losing everything. Slowly, without haste, while hiding, he eliminated the unwanted elements, for the sake of a perfect revenge. And now that Nina has returned, the cult followers will likely move again too. Adrian whispered to himself the necessity of preparing to start his new game, for the sake of his queen. The next morning, Carol called out to Nina, hurrying her, but she asked him to wait a moment. Carol scolded her for making all this fuss just to see the herbs, so Nina apologized cheerfully, justifying it by saying she overslept because of drinking too much the previous night. After she finished getting ready, she announced she was ready. When she saw the glass greenhouse, she screamed in admiration. It was truly amazing. She wondered in amazement, "Is it a real glass greenhouse?" She asked Carol anxiously if the duchy had become poor because of building this expensive greenhouse. And Carol told her with a smile that he had already drained her young master. He explained that he improved and re-improved what he took from her garden, and that he would soon entrust some of them to civilians to grow in large quantities, on the condition that the duchy buys all the well-grown herbs. Nina wondered if that was possible budget-wise, and Carol replied that it depends on their commander. He pointed at her, saying she would regain their land again, right? Nina answered him confidently that there was no problem at all, and that they only had to wait for the exchange meeting next month. Carol said he trusted her. Carol added that he is developing new medicines too, but it's hard for him alone, and it would be good to have someone to help him. But finding someone willing to do this work isn't easy. Nina sighed, saying if only there was someone who would come running with excitement just to see her biology reports. She suddenly realized there was someone. She told Carol excitedly that she knew someone and would contact them. He asked if they were smart. Nina thought of the great sage of Bluestone Island, the hero of the original story, but of course she couldn't say that. She said she needed to get Lewis's permission too and would tell him when she got a response. She told Kyril she planned to go to the Violet Forest today. She asked him if he needed anything, and he said what he needed. Then Kyril gave her a huge pile of papers, so Nina screamed in surprise, and Kyril told her he should have asked sooner. She wondered why there were so many, and Kyril told her it was because someone disappeared for 2 years, and the work had piled up. Nina thanked him for waiting and kissed him on his cheek, causing him to call her scary and tell her to hurry up and go out. She left feeling happy. She thought that over the past 2 years, everyone had done their best in their respective positions. Therefore, she cannot sit idly by either. And in fact, she had an amazing idea this morning. Besides the herbs in Myeongchol, there is another gold mine hidden in the Violet Forest. She thought that if she could get that, living in luxury would just be a matter of time. She shouted excitedly, calling for them to wait a bit, announcing that Nina is inevitably coming. Jean said he would go too. Nina was surprised by his words. Jean told her she said she was going to the Violet Forest to find something. And since the rule is to work in teams of 2, he would go with her. Nina hesitated at first, saying she was fine alone. But she quickly changed her mind and said excitedly that 2 people were better and invited him to go together. She told him they might stay there for days, so they should pack plenty of food. Jean agreed, thinking to himself if this was a picnic. Later, Nina called out to Jean and asked him if he had finished gathering the herbs, and he replied yes. Nina noticed that Jean was acting strangely today and not talking much. When the sun was about to set, she asked him if they should camp here, and he agreed. Jean told her they would go deeper than the barrier starting tomorrow, and that he hadn't been there before. But he already... Nina asked him if he was worried, confirming it would be dangerous, but there was something they couldn't find except there. Jean asked her if the spirits were the ones telling her these things, and she replied that the spirits tell her some things, and Carol requested others. Jean was silent for a few moments. Suddenly, Jean raised his head, shouting that he couldn't stand this anymore. So Nina wondered what was really wrong with him. He placed his hand on his chest and asked her to look at him.